What drives a man who has everything to commit a crime that money cannot hide? Konstantin Orlov was not looking at his smartphone screen, but into the abyss. In a grainy video from a camera trap sent to him via a secure channel, two men in camouflage were pulling a whimpering ball of gray fur out of a hole. Orlov zoomed in on the image. He needed the best, the strongest. At that moment, his finger hovered over the call button. One call, and the mechanism he had set in motion would become irreversible. Before we continue, let us know which city you are from. We are interested in knowing where our videos are being watched. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your rating. It motivates us to make new and interesting videos. Well, let's get started. He pressed the button. A hoarse, faceless voice answered on the other end of the line. "It's ready, Konstantin Yuryevich. We have the goods." Orlov nodded coldly to the emptiness of his billion-ruble office. "Deliver it by evening. The money will be with Stepan." He hung up without saying a word of thanks. For him, it was just another deal. He wasn't buying an animal. He was buying his daughter Elisa's smile, and he was willing to pay any price for it. If only he knew that smile would cost him everything he had ever built. 10-year-old Elisa sat on the huge terrace of their new country house. The house looked like a spaceship that had landed in the middle of a centuries-old pine forest. But the girl was lonely. Her mother had moved to another country after the divorce, and her father was there, but it was as if he wasn't. He spoke to her the same way he spoke to his subordinates, giving her tasks and checking her work. "Alice, have you done your French homework? Alice, your tennis coach will be here at 5. And then, 3 days ago, she showed him a documentary about wolves, about how they live as a family, how they care for each other. She saw something in their eyes that she had never seen in the eyes of humans. And she said, 'Dad, I want a wolf cub.'" Konstantin Orlov, a man who built entire neighborhoods and shaped people's destinies, took this as just another project. Project Happiness for My Daughter. He didn't try to explain to her that it was impossible and illegal. The word impossible was not in his vocabulary. He simply found a man, Stepan, who dealt with delicate matters. Stepan found people to do the job. And now, a gray ball of fur, torn from its mother, was riding in the trunk of an old Niva toward its golden cage. The guys did everything quickly and dirty. But they made one tiny mistake. One of them dropped an empty pack of rare cigarettes near the den. It seemed like a minor detail. But in this forest, there was a man for whom such details did not exist. Huntsman Peter Romanov stood over the ransacked den. He knew this she-wolf. He called her Arda for her intelligence and stature. He had been watching her for 3 years. He knew there were 4 cubs in this litter. And now the place smelled of fear, strangers, and tobacco. Peter picked up the crumpled pack from the ground. Balkan Star. Only one person in their area smoked those. The gamekeeper's heart began to beat faster. This was not just poaching. It was a contract killing, and he had little doubt who had ordered it. But at that moment, his blood ran cold for another reason. He saw tracks, not wolf tracks. The tracks of a she-wolf returning to an empty home. She wasn't howling. She began to methodically comb the ground, circle after circle, widening her radius. She had begun her search. And Peter realized that the worst thing was not that the wolf cub had been stolen. The worst thing was that its mother would now be looking for it. And Arda did not know how to forgive. When an inconspicuous Niva pulled up to Orlov's house in the evening, Konstantin personally went out to meet the delivery. A woven basket was handed to him from the trunk. Inside, trembling with fear, sat the wolf cub. Its eyes, wild and full of terror, stared at Orlov. "Good work, Stepan," Konstantin said, handing him a thick envelope. Stepan, a man with shifty eyes and perpetual debts, quickly hid the money. "Konstantin Yuryevich, you... be careful. His mother. She's a dangerous woman." Orlov only smiled. "My security is more dangerous than any woman. Take care of the men who did this. They mustn't remember anything." He didn't see the fear flash across Stepan's eyes. Not of him, but of what they had done. Alice gasped when her father brought the basket into her room. The wolf cub she had named Kay was just like the ones in the movies. She spent the whole night with him, trying to feed him pieces of Parma ham. Konstantin watched her through the doorway, and for the first time in a long time, a semblance of a smile appeared on his face. He had won. He had once again bought something that could not be sold. He did not yet know that the howling that rang out over the forest that night was not just a cry of longing. It was a cry that declared war. A week passed. Kai lived in a huge enclosure built in 2 days by Orlov's best workers. There was even an artificial stream and a mini rock inside. But the wolf cub did not play. He sat in the corner and stared toward the forest. He refused the elite food, but one night he strangled a crow that had carelessly landed on the fence. Alice saw this, and her delight slowly gave way to alarm. This was no dog. This was a captive. She began to secretly read everything she could find about wolves on the internet. And the more she read about their loyalty to the pack and their family ties, the colder she felt inside. The veterinarian, whom Orlov had called through a secret channel, was taciturn. After examining Kay, he delivered his verdict. "Konstantin Yuryevich, this is not a pet. It's a ticking time bomb. He's healthy, but he's wild. In a couple of months, he'll start testing the bars for strength. And in 6 months, he'll be able to break them. I won't ask where you got him, but my advice is to return him before it's too late." Orlov just waved him off, writing the doctor a check with 5 zeros for his silence. Too late did not exist for him. But that same evening, the security system detected movement at the far fence. The head of security, a former Special Forces soldier named Anton, reported to Orlov. "It's a wolf. A big one. It's walking along the perimeter. It's not coming close, just watching. It's been 3 hours." Orlov looked at the monitors. In the infrared spectrum, he saw a glowing figure. It was moving methodically, as if studying every meter of the fence, every camera. There was no animal instinct in its movements. There was logic. There was intelligence. "Reinforce the posts. If it comes closer than 50 meters, shoot to kill," Konstantin ordered coldly. But what happened the next morning did not fit any of the instructions. At the main gate, right in front of the camera, lay a freshly killed hare, untouched, just lying there, like an offering, or like a warning. Alice saw the hare when she was walking to her car to go to school. The guards quickly removed it, but she understood everything. She looked toward the forest and thought she saw 2 yellow eyes staring at her from behind the trees. All day at school, she couldn't think about anything. She opened an article on her tablet. A she-wolf can travel hundreds of kilometers in search of her cub. Hundreds of kilometers. She looked at the map. It was only 10 kilometers from their house to the reserve. 10 kilometers of despair. In the evening, she went into her father's study. "Dad." Her voice trembled. "We have to return it. Mom is looking for it." Konstantin looked up from his papers. His face hardened. "Alice, don't talk nonsense. It's just a wild animal. It doesn't have a mother in the way you understand it. It has a pack. But we stole him. It's not right, the girl almost shouted. It was the first time she had ever gone against his will. The conversation is over, Orlov said sharply. He's staying here. It's for your own safety. Meanwhile, the gamekeeper, Peter, wasn't sitting around doing nothing. He questioned all the hunters and residents of the surrounding villages. Stepan's name came up more and more often. The man who had always been broke suddenly paid off all his debts. Peter found him at a local tavern. He didn't threaten him. He sat down opposite him and said quietly, "Stepan, I know about the wolf cub. I know you did this. I don't need your confession. I want you to know one thing. Arda is alone now. She is searching. And when a desperate lone wolf begins to kill livestock to survive, I will have to issue a license to shoot her. And I'll write it out in your name. You didn't just steal a wolf cub. You sentenced his mother to death." Peter stood up and left, leaving Stepan alone. Stepan looked at his hands, the hands that had taken the money from Orlov, and suddenly they seemed foreign to him. That night, all hell broke loose at Orlov's estate. But not in the way everyone expected. Arda didn't try to break through. She launched a psychological attack. She found a weak spot in the electronic security system, a blind spot between two motion sensors near an old stream. And she began to howl. But not just howling. Her howls were different. Sometimes plaintive, like a child crying, sometimes low and threatening. They penetrated the triple-glazed windows, and it seemed as if the walls were vibrating. The guards were on high alert. Two purebred sheepdogs kept in an enclosure whimpered and cowered on the ground. Orlov himself, a man who feared no one, felt a chill run down his spine. But worst of all was that Kai in his enclosure began to respond. His thin, uncertain howl merged with his mother's, turning into a terrifying symphony of anguish and rage. Anton, the head of security, entered Orlov's office. His usually impassive face was pale. "Konstantin Yuryevich, we can't work like this. People are scared. This creature is too smart, and it doesn't rush in. It's wearing us down. We need specialists. Real hunters who will track her down and solve the problem. Once and for all." Orlov looked at the monitor. It was Alice. She was standing at her bedroom window, staring into the darkness. He realized it was his fault, but it was too late to change anything. Admitting his mistake meant losing. "Fine," he said. "Find the best. I need results." Alice heard everything. She stood behind the door and heard every word. "Solve the problem." She understood what that meant. They were going to kill Kay's mother. At that moment, something inside her broke. She was no longer her father's little girl. She was now Kay's ally. At night, when the howling subsided for a moment, she slipped out of her room. She had a plan. It was crazy, childish, but it was the only one she had. She took the large wire cutters that the workers had left in the pantry. Her heart was beating so loudly that it seemed to be heard throughout the house. She crept up to the enclosure. Kay, sensing her, whimpered and rushed to the bars. "Quiet, quiet, my dear," she whispered, trying to insert the wire cutters into the mesh. "I'll let you out. We'll run away together." At that very moment, a few kilometers away, Stepan, unable to bear the pangs of conscience, was dialing a number. But not Orlova's. He was calling the gamekeeper. "Pyotr Andreich," he croaked into the receiver. "Orlov has hired people. They're going after Arda. She won't be alive in the morning." Pyotr froze. He looked at the map. The only chance to intercept them was to enter Orlov's territory. But for that, he needed a warrant. And there was no time to get one. And then Arda made her move. She realized that time was running out. She stopped howling. The silence that followed was scarier than any howl. She left her observation post and disappeared into the forest. Anton reported to Orlov, "She's off the radar. She's gone." Orlov breathed a sigh of relief. He decided that the beast had given up. But he was wrong. Arda didn't back down. She changed tactics. An hour later, the police received a call from a neighboring property belonging to an oil tycoon. There were screams on the other end of the line. 2 elite alibi dogs, show champions worth as much as a sports car, had been found dead at the fence bordering Orlov's estate. They had been torn apart with inhuman fury. Konstantin understood everything. This was no longer just a siege. It was an act of revenge. And the next blow would be struck on his territory. His guards had failed. His security system had proved useless against the primal fury of a mother. He looked at Elisa's pale face over breakfast and made his final decision. He picked up the phone and called Anton. "Did Strelkov call? Where are they?" "They'll be there in an hour, Konstantin Yuryevich." "Excellent. The bonus will be triple. But I don't want any more bodies in the neighboring areas. I want them to find her and destroy her. In the forest. Quietly. So that no one will know." Alice, standing by the stairs, heard this sentence. She looked at her hands. The wire cutters didn't help. The mesh was too thick. But she knew its weak spot. A small staff gate at the back of the garden. The key always hung on a nail in the gardener's shed. Her heart stopped. She had less than an hour left. She rushed to her room, put on a dark jacket and sneakers. She had only one plan in her head: to free Kai and run away with him into the forest, anywhere, as long as she could save him and his mother. She didn't know that gamekeeper Peter, disregarding all the rules, was already rushing to the village, alerting the local police station and lying to them about armed poachers on private property. She didn't know that 2 unmarked cars with people in camouflage were already entering the forest from the other side. And she certainly didn't know that Arda, having carried out her diversionary maneuver, was already returning. But not to the fence. She was heading for the same old stream where there was a blind spot. All the figures converged at a single point. And at the epicenter of this storm was a little girl running across a perfect lawn to do the most important thing in her life. The head of security saw her on the cameras and shouted into his radio in a panic. "Attention all posts! The boss's daughter is running toward the enclosure. Don't shoot. I repeat, don't shoot." But his words were drowned out by a piercing howl that came not from the forest, but from right behind the fence. Arda was already there. The wolf's cry tore the night apart. It was not a mournful cry, but a battle cry. Konstantin Orlov, in his sterile office, shuddered as if the sound had passed through the armored glass and struck him right in the heart. On dozens of monitors, he saw his trained guards freeze. He saw his daughter, his little Alice, freeze halfway to the gardener's house. She was so close to her goal, and that scream could ruin everything. But what the girl did next made Orlov's blood run cold. She wasn't scared. She ran even faster. The fear that should have stopped her became fuel. Orlov grabbed the intercom microphone. "Anton, status. What's going on with my daughter?" His voice, always calm as stone, cracked. "She's at the gardener's house, Konstantin Yuryevich. I think she's looking for the key. The wolf is right by the fence, by the stream. I don't understand how it got past the sensors." Came the panicked muttering of the head of security in response. Orlov switched the camera. It was true. Arda was not where she was supposed to be. She was standing in the blind spot the technician had warned about. She hadn't just found it. She had memorized it. and she used it at the most opportune moment. What Orlov feared most began to happen. The situation spiraled out of his control. Alice pulled the key off the nail. The metal was cold and heavy. Her fingers trembled, but she clutched it tightly, as if it were the key to the whole world. Now to the enclosure. She ran across the dew-covered grass, oblivious to her surroundings. She didn't see the two camouflaged figures freeze in the forest when they heard the howling so close. They didn't understand what was happening. Their target was the she-wolf in the forest, not on the premises. Their orders were to remain silent. What was happening resembled an assault. One of them raised his radio to contact the client, but there was silence on the air. Orlov was busy with his daughter. At that very moment, 2 police cars and Peter's old Niva sped up to the main gate of the estate. Silent, flashing lights bathed the luxurious facade in blue, alarming light. The guards at the entrance were confused. On the one hand, they had orders not to let anyone in. On the other, there was a police major and an angry gamekeeper waving some papers at them. "There are armed criminals here. Open up immediately, or we'll break down the gate by force," Peter roared, bluffing with the desperation of a doomed man. He knew he only had a few minutes before his lie was exposed. But he also knew that those minutes would decide everything. Arda wasn't just howling. It was a diversionary tactic. While everyone was looking at her under cover of darkness and noise, the ground under the fence by the stream began to give way. She was digging, frantically breaking her claws, feeling no pain. She dug into the earth, saturated with the scent of her son. Every clump of earth she threw away was a step closer to him. Orlov, switching cameras in an attempt to understand her plan, turned the lens toward the stream too late. He saw it. A tunnel. Slow but inevitable. He realized that this she-wolf was not just an animal. She was an engineer. She was a strategist. And she was winning. Alice ran to the enclosure. Kai was pacing inside, whimpering and throwing himself against the mesh. He could sense his mother. With trembling hands, the girl inserted the key into the lock of the service gate. 1 turn, 2. The heavy metal door gave way. The path to freedom was open. "Run, Kai, run," she whispered, throwing open the gate. The wolf cub froze for a moment. He looked at Alice, and there was no gratitude in his eyes, only a wild, primal longing. And then he took off. But not into the depths of the garden, not toward the safety of the forest. He ran straight to the place where his mother's scent and call were coming from. Konstantin Orlov watched this on the main monitor. His world was collapsing in real time. His daughter had released a wild animal. His security was disoriented. The police were at his gate, and the she-wolf was about to break through. He realized that in an instant, he could lose everything that was dear to him. Not money, not status. His daughter, the only person whose love he had so desperately and so hopelessly tried to buy. He realized it was his fault, but it was too late. Kai reached the stream just as Arda's bloodied, mud-covered muzzle appeared from under the fence. She had broken through. Seeing her son, she let out a quiet, moaning sound. It was something between a growl and a cry. She began to frantically lick him, sniffing him, checking to see if he was okay. Alice, who had run up behind her, stopped 10 steps away. She did not see the monster her father had described. She saw a mother who had found her child. And at that moment, she felt not fear, but shame. A burning, all-consuming shame for being the cause of this suffering. The gate gave way. Peter and 2 policemen rushed into the yard. They saw the scene, the girl, the wolf cub, and a huge she-wolf standing next to him. "Stop, don't move," shouted one of the policemen, raising his service pistol. Anton, the head of security, who was running from the other side, also saw this scene. One thought flashed through his mind. The she-wolf was about to attack the girl to protect her cub. Professional instinct kicked in faster than reason. He also grabbed his Glock. Orlov yelled into the microphone in his bunker, "Don't shoot! Anton, don't shoot! That's an order!" But it was too late. His voice was drowned out by the chaos. In the forest, hearing the screams and seeing the lights, one of the mercenaries realized that their mission had failed. But there she was, the target, right in front of him, in the spotlight. Easy prey. He smoothly raised his rifle with night vision, catching Arda's figure in the crosshairs. He knew nothing about the girl or the police. He had orders, and he was going to carry them out. 3 people in 3 different places made the same decision at the same time. The police officer who was supposed to protect, the security guard who was supposed to save, and the mercenary who was supposed to kill. 3 index fingers rested on the triggers. At that moment, Alice, seeing the guns pointed at the wolves, took a step forward and spread her arms, trying to shield the reunited family. "No!" she cried desperately. And at that moment, the deafening crack of a gunshot split the night's silence. The shot rang out like a thunderclap in a confined space. For a torturous, endless moment, everything froze. Konstantin Orlov jumped up in his office, knocking over his chair. His eyes were fixed on the monitor, where his daughter stood with her arms outstretched, directly in the line of fire. He didn't breathe. He waited for her to fall. But Alice stood there, and at her feet, twitching, was not a wolf, but a man. Anton, the head of security, dropped his gun and slowly slid down the trunk of the nearest pine tree, staring at his hand, from which blood was gushing. The mercenary's bullet, intended for Arda, passed centimeters from her and hit the guard in the shoulder. No one understood what had happened. The policeman, stunned by Alice's actions, lowered his gun. Peter, the only one who assessed the situation soberly, realized that the shots had not come from the estate. The shots were coming from the forest. "Sniper, everyone get down!" he shouted, rushing toward Elisa and pulling her behind him for cover behind an artificial boulder. At that moment, a second bullet struck the ground where they had just been standing. Orlov, seeing that his daughter was in cover, felt a brief sense of relief, which was immediately replaced by icy rage. His men had been wounded, on his territory. His daughter had almost been killed. The man he trusted most, his own security service, had proved helpless. He pressed the emergency call button. "Pavel!" he barked into the phone, addressing the head of his personal security force, a former GRU colonel. "Code Red. Target. Sosnovy Bor. Unknown snipers. Clear the perimeter. I need them. Alive." There was no fear in his voice, only an order to the killing machine he kept for use in case of war. And the war began. Arda, at the moment of the first shot, instinctively knocked Kay off his feet and covered him with her body. But when Peter dragged Alice to safety, she did what no one expected. She didn't run away. She left Kay in the tunnel and, pressing herself to the ground, darted like a shadow along the fence, disappearing into the darkness. She understood where the threat was coming from, and she was going toward it, not to save herself, to attack. Peter held the trembling Alice close to him. "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" he whispered. The girl shook her head, her eyes wide with terror. "They wanted to kill her. Kay's mother," she whispered. Peter looked toward the forest. He realized who the shooters were. They weren't poachers. They were professionals. And he understood whose orders they were following. He looked at the luxurious house, shining like an impregnable fortress. The choice was simple: honor or life. He could have simply waited for reinforcements, but he knew that the wolf would be killed before they arrived, and he knew that he would not be able to look this girl in the eyes after that. "Stay here. Don't go anywhere," he ordered Alice, and crouching down, rushed to the wounded Anton. The police were already trying to give him first aid. "Who shot him?" Peter asked briefly. "I don't know. From the forest," Anton moaned. "It's Orlov's men," Peter said confidently. The police major looked at him suspiciously. "What makes you think so? Why would he shoot his own men?" "They're not his men. They're mercenaries. He ordered them to kill the wolf." But something went wrong. At that moment, additional blinding searchlights flashed around the perimeter of the estate, turning night into day. The cleanup operation began. Konstantin Orlov went downstairs. He walked through his perfect home as if it were enemy territory. He was no longer in control. He was the target. He stepped out onto the terrace. The police, his wounded bodyguard, the gamekeeper, all of that was now secondary. The main thing was Alice. He saw her huddled behind a rock. His heart seemed to stop. He took a step toward her, but Peter blocked his way. "Is this your doing, Orlov?" The gamekeeper asked quietly, but with hatred. "Get out of the way," Konstantin hissed. "You almost killed your own daughter to save your own skin. Do you even understand what you've done?" And then Orlov understood. The truth he had so carefully hidden turned out to be worse than the lies he had surrounded himself with. He had stolen a wolf cub to buy love. He had hired killers to cover up the theft. And in the end, he had almost lost the only thing that mattered to him. He looked at Peter, then at Alice, and for the first time in his life, he didn't know what to say. He was no longer the almighty Orlov. He was just a father who had made a terrible mistake. A silent war began in the forest. Orlov's men, the Pavlovites, moved like ghosts. They were top-notch professionals. They quickly located the mercenaries' position. But they were no novices either. A short, brutal game of cat and mouse began. But a third player appeared in this game: Arda. She moved through the forest faster and quieter than any special forces soldier. She followed the scent of gunpowder and fear. The mercenary who was shooting reloaded his rifle when he heard a soft crack behind him. He spun around, but it was too late. All he saw were two yellow eyes flashing in the darkness. He didn't even have time to scream. Arda didn't kill him. She latched onto his leg, tearing off a chunk of flesh along with his tactical boot, and then disappeared into the thicket. His partner, hearing a muffled groan, realized they had fallen into a trap. He dropped his rifle and ran. But he didn't know this forest. The she-wolf did. She didn't chase him. She simply guided him. To where she wanted him to go? Straight into the hands of Pavlov's men. 5 minutes later, it was all over. Two mercenaries, one with a torn wound on his leg, the other white with fear, were kneeling before Orlov's men. "Who ordered this?" Pavel, their commander, asked quietly. The mercenaries remained silent. Pavel nodded to one of his fighters. He took out a knife. Orlov stood in front of Peter and Alice. He didn't know that his men had already captured the shooters. He didn't know that the she-wolf had taken revenge. He only saw the accusing eyes of his daughter. And in them, he saw his sentence. "Alice, he began. But the words stuck in his throat. What could he say? That he would fix everything? That he would pay? He realized that money was no longer of any use here. He had suffered a complete and crushing defeat. Seeing his condition, Peter suddenly felt not anger, but something like pity. He saw not an oligarch, but a broken man. The wolf cub. Where is he? He asked, breaking the agonizing silence. Alice raised her head. He's there. In the burrow, she whispered, pointing toward the stream. All three looked in that direction. Kai, hearing that the shots had stopped, cautiously poked his snout out of the hole. He was alone. His mother had disappeared. He looked around and let out a thin, plaintive whimper, full of loneliness and fear. And that sound finally broke something inside Konstantin Orlov. He realized that in trying to build an artificial family for his daughter, he had destroyed the real one. And now he had to fix everything, even if it meant destroying himself. He turned to Peter. "Help me," he said, not as an order, but as a request. At that moment, Pavel emerged from the forest. He approached Orlov and reported quietly, "We got them. They're Stepan's men. They say you ordered it. The order is to eliminate them." Orlov nodded slowly. He looked at the police major who had heard the conversation, then at Peter, then at Alice. He no longer knew who he was. A caring father, a cold-blooded criminal, a victim of circumstances. The world in which he was the master, where everything was simple and understandable, turned out to be an illusion, and now that illusion was crumbling to dust before his eyes, under the light of the police flashing lights. And from the darkness, dozens of invisible eyes were watching him. His guards, the police, his daughter. And they were all waiting to see what he would do next. Orlov's request hung in the ringing silence. Peter looked at him for a long time, studying him, trying to understand whether this was another manipulation or a glimpse of real humanity. The police major, hearing the report of the order to eliminate him, tensed, his hand falling on his holster. He saw before him not just a criminal, but the organizer of a criminal gang. Elisa, hearing that her father had ordered the murder of Kay's mother, recoiled from him. And this silent gesture struck Konstantin harder than any accusation. Fate was catching up with him with every step, and he knew there was no way back. "How can I help you, Konstantin Yuryevich?" the major asked in an icy tone. "Put everything back where it belongs," Orlov replied hollowly, without taking his eyes off Peter. He realized that this gamekeeper, a man from another world, was the only one who could fix things now. Not legally, but for real. The she-wolf, Arda. Will she come back for him? He asked Peter. The question sounded almost like a plea. There was no longer any arrogance of an oligarch in it, only the despair of a father looking for a way to atone for his guilt towards his child. Peter nodded. "She'll come back, if she's alive. Your men, they could have hurt her." Pavel, the commander of the Pavlovites, took a step forward. "She's not hurt. She wounded one of the shooters herself and got away. She did a clean job." Everyone looked at him in amazement. The story was becoming increasingly unbelievable. The she-wolf hadn't just escaped. She had fought back. She had taken revenge. Orlov felt a strange, inappropriate respect for this animal. She had defended her family in a way he never could. "What do we do?" Orlov asked this question for the first time in his life, and it wasn't rhetorical. He really didn't know. All his schemes, all his connections and money were useless in the face of this primitive drama. Peter took the initiative. "Major, I want your men to cordon off the area. The shooters are your jurisdiction. Pavel," he turned to the Special Forces commander, "have your men comb the forest and report back if they see the she-wolf. No weapons, just observation. We need to let her know that the threat is gone. Pavel looked at Orlov, who nodded silently. The order was given. The killing machine had turned into a rescue service. Seeing that the adults had begun to act, Alice calmed down a little. She approached the place where Kai was hiding. The wolf cub, sensing her, whimpered more quietly. He also felt the tension ease. Alice sat down on the ground, not afraid to dirty her expensive clothes. She began to talk to him quietly, as she had done at the enclosure, telling him that his mother would come soon. Konstantin watched the scene, his heart aching with pain and tenderness. He realized that his daughter was much wiser and braver than he was. She was trying to correct his mistake, risking everything, while he was trying to hide it. He no longer knew who he was, but he knew exactly who he wanted to be. He wanted to be a father his daughter could be proud of. 2 hours passed. Tense anticipation enveloped the estate. The wounded Anton and the mercenaries were taken away by the police. Only Orlov, Alice, Peter, and a few police officers remained on the grounds. Pavel's men reported that they had found traces of the she-wolf. She had made a large circle, and now seemed to be watching the estate from a safe distance. She was waiting. She was assessing. "She won't come near as long as we're here," said Peter. "Too many people, too many smells." He looked at Orlov. "She's afraid of you. You're her main threat." At that moment, a plan formed in Orlov's mind. Risky, crazy, but the only right thing to do. He had to eliminate the threat himself. He had to show the she-wolf that he was no longer her enemy. "I know what to do," he said. He approached Alice. "Sweetheart, let's go inside." Alice looked at him suspiciously. "What about Kai?" "We'll help him, I promise." There was so much sincerity in his voice that she hesitated, then got up and followed him. Peter and the Major exchanged puzzled glances. Entering the house, Orlov gave a series of short, clear orders. "Pavel, withdraw your men completely. Have them leave the forest and the site. Major, I ask you and your men to also leave my property. I take full responsibility. I am prepared to appear before you tomorrow morning with my lawyers and give a full statement." The Major was taken aback. "Orlov, do you realize that you are left alone with a wild beast who has just maimed a man?" "I understand. But this is my only chance. Leave. Everyone." His confidence was so great that, after a brief argument and a call to his superiors, the Major agreed, taking a written commitment from Orlov. Half an hour later, almost complete silence reigned on the estate. Everyone had left. Only 3 remained: Orlov, Alice, and Peter, who flatly refused to leave. "I won't leave you alone with the girl," he said firmly. Orlov did not argue. He was even grateful. He walked over to the main control panel and pressed a button. With a hum, powerful spotlights began to go out around the perimeter. The estate was plunged into semi-darkness, lit only by the faint light from the windows of the house. "She must see that we are no longer defending ourselves," he explained to Peter. Then he did the hardest thing. He walked over to the huge glass wall facing the garden and threw it wide open. Cool night air rushed into the sterile space of the house. "Dad, what are you doing?" Alice asked fearfully. "Letting life in, daughter." He replied quietly. He took her by the hand. "Let's go." He led her and Peter to the terrace. They stopped at the very edge. And then Orlov began to speak, loudly, so that his voice carried throughout the garden. "I know you can hear me," he shouted into the darkness. "I was wrong. I made a terrible mistake. I didn't want to hurt you or your son. He's here. He's waiting for you. The way is clear. I won't hurt you anymore." It was the strangest monologue of his life. An oligarch who made decisions in whispers in his office was shouting words of apology into the night forest. Peter looked at him, and his respect for this man grew with every passing second. Alice squeezed her father's hand and also looked into the darkness, her lips whispering, "Mommy, come here. Please." They stood there for about 10 minutes. Nothing happened. Orlov felt hope beginning to leave him. Maybe he had done everything wrong. Maybe it was all for nothing. And then a shadow appeared from behind the trees. It moved slowly, uncertainly. It was Arda. She stopped at the border between light and shadow, peering at the three figures on the terrace. She didn't know what words were, but she could sense the intonation. She saw no more aggression. She saw motionless figures. She saw her cub, who, sensing her, whimpered again and crawled out of the burrow. Kai took a few steps toward his mother. Arda took a step toward him. The distance between them was closing. But at that moment, something unexpected happened. Stepan, the mediator who was tormented by his conscience, decided that Orlov would betray him. In a panic, he drove to the estate to try to negotiate. Seeing that there were no guards and the gate was ajar, he slipped onto the property. He didn't know what was going on. He was just looking for Orlov. And he came out from around the corner of the house just as the she-wolf and her cub were a few meters apart. Seeing the wolf so close, Stepan screamed in terror and stumbled and fell. His scream broke the fragile truce. Arda took it as an attack. She bared her teeth, the hair on her neck bristling. She lunged forward, but not toward Stepan. She rushed toward her son to pull him away. But her movement was so sudden that Alice, frightened for Kay, also took a step forward, shouting, "Don't touch him!" Everything became chaotic. There were screams and growls. Arda, disoriented by the appearance of a new person and the cry of the girl she no longer perceived as a threat, stopped in confusion. And at that moment, Konstantin Orlov stood before her. He stood between the wolf and his daughter, spreading his arms wide. Just as Alice had done an hour ago. He wasn't trying to protect her from the wolf. He was trying to protect the wolf from her fear. He looked straight into Arda's yellow eyes, and there was nothing in his gaze but a plea for forgiveness. The world narrowed to the space between Konstantin Orlov and the wolf. He looked into her yellow, inhumanly intelligent eyes and saw not rage, but confusion and fear, a mother's fear for her child. At that moment, he realized that all his battles in business, all the hostile takeovers and court victories, were child's play compared to this silent duel. Money, threats, and connections had no power here. Only one thing worked here: intention. And his intention was pure for the first time in many years. He wasn't protecting his daughter from a beast. He was protecting their fragile chance at peace from her childish fear. He slowly, very slowly, lowered his hands. He made no sudden movements. He simply showed that he was unarmed. Then he turned his head, keeping his eyes on Arda, and said quietly but clearly, so that Alice could hear, "Quiet, sweetheart. It's okay. Don't be afraid. She's just your mom." His voice was calm. There was no command in it, only a request. Hearing him, Alice froze. She looked at her father's back, at his tense shoulders, and she understood. He wasn't attacking. He was protecting. And she, obeying some inner instinct, slowly dropped to her knees, making herself small and harmless. She showed the wolf that she was submitting. It was a turning point. Arda saw how the whole picture had changed. The big man, the main threat, stood motionless and spoke in a soothing voice. The little girl knelt on the ground in a sign of submission, The third man, who had been shouting, was writhing on the ground, posing no danger. The way to her son was clear. She took another step. Kai, seeing this, hesitantly trotted toward her. Their noses met. Arda made a low, guttural sound that no one but her son could hear. It was a command. She quickly sniffed him, made sure he was unharmed, and gently nudged him with her muzzle toward the safety of the darkness of the tunnel. Another second, and they were both gone, disappearing into the night. They simply vanished, as if they had never been there. There was complete silence. It was broken only by Stepan's stifled sobs and Orlov's heavy breathing. And then Alisa's crying broke the silence. She wasn't crying out of fear. She was crying out of relief, out of shame, out of the emotions that were overwhelming her. Konstantin slowly turned around and knelt down next to her. And for the first time in many years, he hugged her not formally, not for show, but the way you hug the most precious thing in the world. He held her close and stroked her hair, whispering, "It's okay, my darling. It's all over." Peter approached them. He looked at the trembling Stepan. "Get out of here," he said quietly, but with such force that Stepan jumped up and limped away. "And don't let me see you again." Then he approached Orlov. "You did everything right, Konstantin Yuryevich," he said. And in these words, from a simple gamekeeper to an oligarch, there was more recognition than in all the articles in Forbes magazine. The next morning, Konstantin Orlov, as promised, arrived at the police station. Without an army of lawyers, only with one who silently took notes. Orlov did not beat around the bush. He methodically and calmly told everything. About his daughter's request, about his pride, about the hired poachers, about the order to eliminate them. He took all the blame upon himself. The consequences were serious. A huge fine, a suspended sentence, and a wave of negative press. But when the judge asked him about his motives, Orlov told the truth for the first time in many years. "I was trying to buy my daughter's love. And in the end, I almost ruined both her life and mine. I learned my lesson, and I learned it well." Instead of paying part of the fine, his lawyer proposed a deal that Orlov had come up with that night. Full funding for the construction and equipping of a modern rehabilitation center for wild animals based in the Peter Reserve. The court agreed. A year passed. It was a bright autumn day. At the edge of the forest, near a new modern building with the inscription, Orlovsky Center for the Rescue of Wild Animals, 3 people were repairing the fence of a lynx enclosure. Konstantin Orlov, wearing a work jacket instead of a Brioni suit, skillfully wielded a screwdriver. Next to him, Alisa, now grown up, with a calm smile on her face, handed him staples. Peter supervised the process. They worked in silence, understanding each other without words. Their common cause became the foundation on which Orlov and Alisa rebuilt their family. "Well, shall we go see who came to visit us last night?" said Peter, wiping his hands. They walked over to the computer, which was receiving data from the camera traps set up throughout the reserve. Peter opened the folder, Sector 7, North Slope. Black and white nighttime photos appeared on the screen. Moose, wild boars, foxes. And then, Peter zoomed in on the image. A pack of wolves stood motionless in a forest clearing. 6 adults and several nearly adult wolves. "Look," Peter said quietly. Alice looked closer. One of the young wolves, strong with a powerful chest, turned its head toward the camera. There was something familiar about its appearance. "It's Kai," she whispered. There was no doubt about it. He had survived. He had found his family. He was home. Konstantin put his hand on her shoulder. He looked at the photo and felt nothing but quiet joy. He hadn't lost anything that night. He had gained so much more. He had found himself and his daughter. At that moment, a long, multi-voiced howl came from the distant hills. It was Kai's pack. But now that sound did not cause fear. It was a symbol of wild, real life. A symbol of family and freedom. Orlov hugged Alice tighter, and together they watched the setting sun, listening to the music of the forest that had taught them the most important lesson of their lives. The question this story leaves behind has no simple answer. Did Orlov do the right thing by taking complete control of the situation in the end and ignoring the police? Or should he have acted strictly according to the law, even at the risk of the wolf's life?